Let's move on to something that other people think maybe should be your main priority. Hannah Campbell and Kirsten Wallace. I think, Hannah, we'll start with you. If you can switch on your camera, unmute yourself. Thank you so much.
Hey, lovely to meet you, Naomi. Um, I am a final year law student and co-founder of Stop Street Harassment and Kristen is my other co-founder. Just for clarity's sake, when I'm talking about public street harassment, I'm talking about catcalling ranging to public
Yep.
sexual assault. And we are just wondering, with your strategy coming in now on violence against women, what that would mean for street harassment.
Well, I think there's a couple of things. I mean, first of all, I've done a lot of work. I've prioritised issues that affect women and girls in my time in the department. Things like, for example, domestic violence and abuse. I've looked. We're bringing forward new legislation around serious sexual offences in the next couple of months. Stalking is there as well, and there are a whole range. The legislation and the support around that in itself is gender neutral, and that any victim can use the law and can claim support, but it's gendered in the sense that a disproportionate number of women are affected by those particular crimes. So that's one of the things I've done. I've also looked at a strategy for women and girls in the justice system and so on. But there are a whole series, I think, of other issues that I'm looking at the moment around particularly harassment of women, the difficulties that women have with things like upskirting and down blousing, and so on. We're actually bringing forward, as part of our legislation in May, we're bringing forward new legislation to make those specific offences. At the minute, they're covered broadly by outraging public decency, but I think it's much better if we can make specific offences to make it clear that's not acceptable. There are things at the minute that are hard to prosecute. So, for example, things like street harassment, catcalling, wolf whistling, all of that kind of stuff that can be very intimidating. It can affect how people choose to live their lives and how they make choices about what they're going to do. All of those things, that fear that women have, that men don't understand when you're walking down a badly lit street and you hear footsteps behind you.
Yeah.
That thing of walking with your keys in your hand because you don't want to have to stop at the door when you get there and feeling relief when you get in. All women have experienced that, and very few men will understand what that's about.
Yeah.
So I think we need to do more than just look at the justice side of this. I think there's an educational issue here. The work that Judge Marinan has done, looking at gender as a potential hate crime, a category of hate crime, looking at potentially misogyny being a hate crime. I think those are things we need to consider, and we're going to do work on that in the department. But I think more fundamentally, we need to look at education. We need to look at cultural attitudes and how we change those. There is a sense, I think, at times of male entitlement that causes people to think that that kind of behaviour is acceptable. It's a kind of masculinity that actually doesn't serve young men well either. See a lot of young men who believe that being macho and tough is where it's at, and that's how they should be. This is how to show that they're real men. And in actual fact, a lot of them are hurting inside, and their death by suicide is really high amongst young men.
Naomi, I want to let Kristen ask a question as well, but we've got one from Yasmin here that I think is sort of relevant to this conversation. Naomi, she says, talked about introducing a strategy like the rest of the UK for this kind of inexcusable behaviour, but seeing as though she's been a justice minister for over a year, does she not think, being a woman herself, that this should have been a more pressing issue? That's the question from Yasmin. And another similar one we got, and I'll let you answer these kind of in conjunction, Naomi, was lots of people try to say that this is all cultural, and that's right, but there are only 28% of sexual offences made it to trial in Northern Ireland in 2019 to 2020. Is there not a problem with the justice system as well? Your justice minister, before we get a question from Kristen there, Wallace.
There are two things. Have we taken too long? I would say no, it has been a priority. And if you look, I've brought forward, by May this year, I'll have brought 5 bills to the Assembly, and 3 of them deal specifically with issues affecting women and girls and violence. And the other committal reform bill deals with a number of issues, including speeding up justice, and the lack of speed in the justice system is one of the reasons why many women, there's a high attrition rate for people bringing forward cases against rape, because women find the wait for the trial actually traumatic. So I don't think you could say I haven't acted in the last year. I think 5 bills is more than any minister has brought to the Assembly in a 5-year term. So just to put it in context, it is a very challenging programme. I've also been working really hard on other issues around the Gillen Review. And yes, cultural change is necessary, but we're also looking very carefully at the structural change. So for example, remote evidence centres have been introduced, and those go live in April, so that women will no longer have to face their abuser in the courtroom in order to give evidence. We're also looking at of ensuring victims' anonymity, so that that is better protected in the court. We have introduced requirements for training for everyone in the justice system who deals with cases of sexual assault and rape. So we are tackling the issues in the justice system. We are dealing with, for example, if you look at the issues in the Gillen review, they're calling very clearly to say that what we need to do is tackle education. So we need to do things like tackle issues around consent, tackle issues around rape myths, and ensure that women are not, we don't get into victim blaming, because that culture needs to change. I suppose the point I'm making is it's not just a justice issue. So what I have brought forward to the executive in terms of a policy suggestion isn't that I lead on a violence against women and girls strategy. We're already doing a lot of things in the department on this, but I actually think this is one for the Department for Communities or for the executive office, because this needs to be cross-cutting in the executive. We need to see the education minister, the health minister, the communities minister, all of those ministers need to step up and take responsibility. I'm happy to put my contribution on the table, and I think we've done a pretty good job, but there's more to do.
I'll let Kristen, do you want to speak? You've got the Justice Minister here. You're clearly very involved in this issue yourself. Do you have a question you want to put?
Yeah, well, I'm basically with Hannah here too. I'm the other co-founder of Stop Street Harassment and I just want to say, I know you said you're bringing that paper forward and that could take a bit of time, and as you say, it's quite hard and it might not actually be kind of like a justice issue, but what would you kind of advise now that we do in this kind of interim stage? What can we do on the ground right now to kind of bring awareness to this? Because obviously we're championing for street harassment and trying to get the education out there, and we have a platform at the minute. We have it both on Instagram and Twitter, trying to get it out there, and I'm just wondering right now, what can we do to kind of push this forward?
Well, from my perspective, the paper will go to executive for Tuesday, so I issued it today. It's not that we're sitting on it and waiting. It's important to me that this gets done and that we get movement. It's also important that we don't just badge what we're already doing and call it a violence against women and girls strategy. So specifically said that we need to deal with the third sector. So people like yourselves who are campaigning on these issues need to be part of forming the strategy.
Yeah,
I think in terms of street harassment and changing culture, there is an issue about calling it out, but not just for women. It's not just for us to say this is unacceptable behaviour. We need allies in this. We need the good men who are out there who don't catcall, who don't abuse women in the street, to actually step up and say, stop it, it's not acceptable. And unless we get to that point, unless when we say to the police that we were harassed, we're not going to be able to get any reaction. It is difficult because for harassment, for example, to be prosecuted, it has to happen more than once. And we all know that mostly it happens more than once, but not the same person. So that makes it really hard to prosecute.
It's part of the problem here, though, Naomi. I wonder, so often in this issue, we're constantly hearing about there's legislation coming and we're going to do something. And it's always, and you've talked already about how in the House of Commons, for example, everything is lengthy. Is there nothing that the Justice Department, for example, government could do to make a material change, tomorrow, the next day, to try to fight this in the short term as well as just the long term?
Well, we have, as I say, even in terms of the justice system, we've intervened and we've already made changes in terms of training for the judiciary and training for those involved in the court system. We've also introduced remote evidence centres so that women won't have to face their abuser when they go to court. We have, in fairness, in a year we've already passed legislation. The Domestic Abuse Act is now in law. So, we have actually got that done in a year. And we actually got it done quicker than Westminster. They were still working on their bill at the moment. Ours is done and is now enacted and has royal assent. So yes, some processes, legislation takes time, but the other stuff that we do in terms of awareness raising, in terms of trying to support groups who are actually out there working with women on the ground to give them support, all of those things we can do without legislative cover. But I think also the cultural change, and I know we keep coming back to this, and it feels like it's a long journey, but actually the cultural change is important, because until we get to a point where there is genuine respect in our community for women, we're not going to get this problem done away with. And it has to start, in my view, with good RSE education. And so I got the education minister to agree to review the minimum core curriculum in order to look at including things like rape myths, like relationships, and looking at things like respect as part of that agenda.
Hannah and Kristen, I wonder, because I want to, this is clearly an important issue, and we have a good few other questions I want to get to, but you've got the Justice Minister here. Naomi, I hope you don't mind. Kristen and Hannah, I wonder if you were, clearly you're at the cold face of this. Do you have a message for Naomi Long about what needs to be done, what the justice system could be doing? I hope you don't mind, Naomi. It's a consultative process, I suppose.
Absolutely not.
Hannah, why don't we start with you? I mean, you've got the Justice Minister here. What's your message?
Yeah, I suppose just as you say, consultation with groups like ourselves. Like I know me and Kristen are the only people in Northern Ireland that are speaking on street harassment, and we're spreading education ourselves. Like we're both 2 students, But I suppose consultation, like I would love if it's possible to put in the chat box like our email for street harassment, and
please
in future, like we would love to be contacted if we're in any time and to discuss these things.
Well, look, I would be really keen to do that. I'm actually setting up a meeting at the moment with the people behind Reclaim the Night and some of the work that they're doing, and also with the Rainbow Project around some of the issues that trans women face and so on. So I would be really keen if you could send me, my email's out there on Twitter and so on in terms of my MLA account. But if you drop me a quick email, I'm more than happy to include you in meetings like that, because I do think there is a genuine issue here that needs to be addressed, and not everything requires a justice response in the courts, but some things do. And I think by highlighting the inequalities that women face in terms of how they're treated and in terms of respect, we can actually start to change things quite dramatically. Things are, believe it or not, better now than they were when I was younger, but they're still not good enough, and it's a very unsettling thing to be a young woman walking home, and then when something happens, people say, why didn't she get a taxi? Why did she walk on her own? Who's to know? Maybe she couldn't afford a taxi. Maybe she was coming home from work. Maybe there isn't always someone around who can walk with you. But it doesn't matter. You should be able to walk the streets on your own. You're not at fault. It's the person who attacks you that's at fault. So I think that there is a real issue here around changing the conversation and getting away from victim blaming and judging people. It isn't a crime to be out at night on your own. And if somebody treats you, of course, we're going to give people good personal security and safety advice. But if someone is on their own at night, they should be safe. And if they aren't safe, there's something wrong with society, and we need to work on that.
Yeah,
okay, we will. I'm sure we can get an email address to you as well. But that was useful then. Thank you very much, Kristen.
Sorry, I'm actually just going to put the email into the chat box now, so you can.
Sure, and if you give it to Ryan, I'm sure he can send it as well.
Brilliant, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Naomi.
A couple of questions we had.